Growing up in the Hollowell house as a child, as bedtime got close for me and my brothers, we would use the one play tactic that we had: questions. Can we watch one more show on PBS? Dad, how about I put in some microwave popcorn? We would even get so desperate that we would actually ask our dad how his day had been. A couple of years later, in high school, my classmates and I, who were taking German together, knew that the properly phrased question would get us out of 53 minutes of lecture and would send Frau Johnson on a wild tangent, avoiding having to do any actual work for the entire class period. What does that have to do with today? Throughout the Gospels, the Pharisees ask questions, and more questions, and more questions. As someone who's been preparing homilies now for a year and a half, already I sense the frustration that Jesus surely felt. I only have to deal with it every other week. He had to deal with it on a daily basis. And today's question seems to be the most outlandish one of all that they ask in the Gospels. If 7 brothers all pass away one at a time without children, whose wife will the woman be in heaven? You get the sense that Jesus wanted to say, "Who cares?" Nonetheless, he's much more patient than us and provides an answer on the dignity of marriage. What is the motivation, though, for the Pharisees? I think that is something that we should maybe reflect on just a bit today. Perhaps the Pharisees, in asking the questions, aren't really interested so much in the answers. Perhaps they, like children preparing for bed, or like teenagers in a German class, perhaps they are trying to avoid having to do what they know they're supposed to do and what they'll have to do eventually. Perhaps they are trying to stave off the inevitable. And I think if we're honest, we have to admit that sometimes we do the same thing with Christ. We know in our hearts that God is calling us to more, calling us to live better, to live holier, to change our ways. But instead, we ask questions of God. Why is there suffering? Why is this or that thing forbidden? Why is this or that thing allowed? We allow questions to serve as a buffer, to protect us from the consuming fire of Christ and life in Him. Now, to the extent that our questions are sincere, because sometimes we do have sincere questions, I would like to offer one of my favorite quotes. It's from a man by the name of Saint Anselm. Very short but very poignant. He said, "I believe that I may understand. I believe that I may understand." Our questions, he's trying to tell us, some of our deep questions only get answers when we first believe. I can't stand outside the faith and ask questions and get all of the answers and then decide to jump in. I cannot reach a total understanding so that then I can believe. St. Anselm puts them back in the proper order and says that I believe so that I can understand. There are certainly some teachings of the church that make sense to us even when we are outside of Christ, when we stand outside of the church. God gives us a certain compass within ourselves to direct us to our home. But then there are a lot of other teachings of Christ and of His church that only make sense if we believe in the church and if we believe in Christ. I cannot understand the teachings on Mary, on birth control, the Trinity, the Eucharist, the sacraments, etc., until I believe that the church and that Christ can teach me something. But to the extent that our questions are being asked to avoid conversion, as I think they are by the Pharisees today, to the extent that our questions allow us to avoid having to change our lives and to experience conversion and the pain that sometimes accompanies reforming our lives, let us not avoid the inevitable. Let us not be afraid, but let us instead run into the arms of Christ and His church.